Thank you, Fred. Ladies and gentlemen and brothers and sisters. My wife and I, in spite of all of our time commitments, try and find one evening each week that we can devote just to being together. And as over the last few weeks, I asked her what she would like to do, and she wanted to work her way back through all the Hobbit movies. And so we've been watching the Hobbit series and the Lord of the Rings and so forth. And as I sat here, our first evening, I was reminded of an experience I had with another ring parable. When I first finished a 2-year Mormon mission, I returned to the university and I signed up for my classes. And 2 of the classes that I took were quite important to me, made a real impression. One was world religions, and the other one was a German literature class. And in that literature class, the first reading assignment we had was a book by the author Gotthold Lessing. And some of you may know the book. The English title is Nathan the Wise. Now, in this book, the Sultan, the story goes, the Sultan Saladin asks Nathan, a wealthy Jewish merchant, which of all the religions is true? And Nathan, being very wise, didn't answer the question directly. He responded with this ring parable. It seems that a wealthy father had a ring that was very desirable for its ability to make someone pleasing to both God and to man. As most fathers would do, though, he loved his children equally, and in moments of parental piety or weakness, he promised the ring to each of his 3 sons. As he came close to the end of his life, he realized he was going to have to make good on his promise, but he didn't know quite how to do that, and so he went out and he had 2 duplicate rings made. And so on his deathbed, he in turn gave one of the rings to each of his 3 sons. Well, unfortunately, the sons got so involved in trying to establish that their ring was the authentic one that it generated quite a bit of contention and strife, not only within the family, but also within the community. In fact, it poisoned the atmosphere in their community. The 3 were finally hauled before a very wise judge, who pointed out that conflict and contention were pleasing to neither God nor to man, and therefore there was a prima facie case that none of them had the real ring. Perhaps the father had had 3 duplicates made, and the original had somehow become lost or hidden. The solution that he suggested was for each son to demonstrate his piety through action. Now, Lessing seemed to be saying that one religion was the same as another. That was a very contentious view at the time, and there's still many of us who don't necessarily accept that premise. However, there were 2 important lessons that I took away from this. One is that contention is not of God, that cooperation is the way forward. We show our love to God by cooperating and by accepting and learning from one another. And second is that we serve God by serving each other. A well-known verse in the Mormon scriptures says that when you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of God. Now, Sheikh Nayan in his presentation emphasized several times, and I hope you caught this, the emphasis on action. In the U.A.E., we've seen many examples of both cooperation and of service. When the young son of one of our members was killed in a hit-and-run accident, Reverend Andy's predecessor at St. Andrew's allowed us to use their much larger facility to hold the funeral service because of the number of people from many different faiths who wanted to come and express their condolences to the family and attend a worship service. And we appreciated that. When we moved into our new building in Abu Dhabi just a year and a half ago, rather than selling off all of the equipment and the furnishings from the old building, we decided to look around for a church that was needy and could use the equipment. And we found an African Pentecostalist church in Dubai that was able to benefit from that. They in turn invited me and my wife and another member of our church to come and join their congregation at a worship service. And quite unexpectedly, the pastor offered me the opportunity to speak. Now, for an ex-Mormon missionary, the idea of being able to speak to another congregation was quite enticing, and I was tempted to take over the meeting, but I resisted. But although their worship service was very different from ours, there was a great outpouring of love and cooperation, and this has resulted in some joint musical events and some other things that have been a real blessing to both of our congregations. With respect to service, we had a very interesting experience recently. We're in the process of renovating one of the villas where we meet. And as we had the fire marshal come in and inspect the building, he informed us that the building was not up to code and that there would need to be additional fire alarms and suppression systems installed in the building. And we expressed some concern about the cost, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I'm going to donate that to your church." And we thought this was a very generous but a rather unusual offer, and so we questioned, why he was doing this. And he said, "Well, a number of years ago, I was a graduate student at a university in a large U.S. city, and at a particularly difficult time in my program, my wife became very ill, and we really struggled, and your local congregation kind of adopted us as a Muslim family and brought in meals and provided for the care of our 2 young children. And I just decided then and there that at some point I was going to repay the favor if I ever had the chance. And so I would like to donate this equipment to your church." Now, truly none of us know in advance how far our little kind acts of service are going to reach. I think it's fair to say, though, that the output of this group has the potential to reach worldwide. And so I'm very delighted to be here in such a distinguished group. Now let me turn to the practice of Christianity and our particular faith in the UAE. Like Brian Grimm, I had an experience first of having lived in Saudi Arabia, where we weren't allowed to practice openly. In fact, we had to meet in very small groups to avoid detection, as it were, by the religious police. And indeed, we had some groups that were expelled from the country from practicing our religion. When we arrived in the U.A.E., on the other hand, it was a very pleasant surprise. Our new chapel in Abu Dhabi is built on land that was donated to us by the deputy ruler of Abu Dhabi, who is the cousin of Sheikh Nayyan. The utilities there are provided to us at no cost. We're on the same standard as the local mosques, which receive their water and power without charge. Now, one of the unique challenges we have in the UAE is that the UAE is a confederation of 7 different emirates, and so each of them has a little bit different way of doing things. In Sharjah, which is next to Dubai, I rented a villa on behalf of a new congregation, went to the municipality to find out what we needed to do to register, and they all looked at each other and said, "Well, we don't quite know. Go talk to the police." So we said, "Well, okay." So I went and talked to the police, and the police captain was a little perplexed. He looked at me and he said, "So do you have loud parties?" "Well, no." "Do you have big events?" "Well, not really very big." I said, "We just want to be good neighbors in case someone of our members parks in front of a neighbor's driveway. We just want to be good neighbors. We want you to know that we're there." And finally his eyes lit up and he said, "Oh, I understand you're afraid someone's going to bother you." And I said, "No, in the UAE that's never been a problem for us." And he said, "Well, here." And he pulled out his card and he wrote down his personal mobile number on it. He said, "If anyone bothers you, please call me." Okay. So we've got tremendous support in the UAE. Now, although we sometimes find it difficult to find the right processes to get things done, we get wonderful support. We've had very generous offers from the rulers of the different emirates in terms of land and other things, and we appreciate that. The UAE stands out as almost a model of intercultural cooperation. Less than 1 in 5 of the inhabitants of the UAE are true Emiratis, are actually from the UAE. And so they're a minority in a sense in their own country. Now, a final word, I have the privilege of teaching at a university where we have 6,000 students coming from more than 80 different countries, and they represent the diversity of the UAE. And we have dialogues in class about many of the kinds of principles and values that seem to cross religious lines. Although most of our students are Muslim, there is intense respect and universal respect for other faith traditions. The university tries to encourage this. So I'm heartened by these young people. They will be the future leaders of the region. However, many of them struggle with problems at home, as do young people in other parts of the world. The nuclear family, where religious values are taught, is increasingly under assault. Not usually intentionally, but sometimes by government policy, sometimes business practices, sometimes by technology. But to its credit, the Dubai government has recognized this trend and is looking at efforts to strengthen the family and promote parenting skills. That's one of its policy priorities. So if religion is going to help mold the next generation of leaders, and I think it should, then we need to make certain that we use our influence to strengthen the home where these values are taught, because no other success can compensate. Now, many of the speakers here today have acknowledged the traditional stewards of the land. I would like to acknowledge the traditional stewards of the land that we come from. They're here with us, and we have a very cooperative, mutually satisfying dialogue about how we work together, about how we worship, they worship. We direct our thoughts and prayers to the same God, and we enjoy working together, and it's been a wonderful place for us to worship, and we appreciate the hospitality of our hosts. Thank you very much.